I told my husband I was pregnant. He panicked. "You ruined everything. I didn't want this child." That same night, he packed his things and left. For my own stepsister, the daughter of my father's new wife. His parents supported him, calling him too young for a family. But years later, they all came crawling back. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Abigail, and 7 years ago, I thought my life was a picture of happiness. Brendan and I had been married for 4 years, but our story started long before that, a whole 7 years of history between us. We were that couple, the college sweethearts who'd made it. We'd struggled through our first tiny apartment with its leaky faucet, celebrated our first real jobs with cheap champagne, and eventually, built a life in a cozy little house with a small yard in the suburbs. We had a history built on shared dreams and quiet promises. One of those dreams, the biggest one, was having a family. We'd always talked about having kids someday, a vague, sunny future that always seemed just over the horizon. But we never put a firm timeline on it, never felt the need to rush. Life, however, doesn't care about timelines. About 3 months before that night, I'd come down with a nasty stomach bug that just wouldn't quit. The doctor put me on a strong course of antibiotics, and well, I guess I was naive. You hear the warnings about antibiotics and birth control, but you never think it'll happen to you. Until it does. When I first missed my period, I chalked it up to stress. A big project at the marketing firm where I worked had me pulling late nights, and my cycle had always been a little unpredictable. But then came the other signs, the ones you can't ignore. The relentless morning nausea, a wave of sickness that would hit me the moment my feet touched the floor. My breasts were so tender, the slightest brush of my shirt felt like sandpaper. On my lunch break one Tuesday, my hands trembling, I slipped into a CVS and bought a pregnancy test. I felt like a teenager, hiding the box at the bottom of my purse. I remember sitting on the closed lid of the toilet in the deserted third-floor office bathroom, the one nobody ever used. The silence was deafening as I waited for those 3 minutes to pass. My heart was hammering against my ribs. And then, there they were. 2 bright pink lines. Unmistakable. I felt the air leave my lungs. I took 3 more tests over the next 2 days, at different times, willing a different result. All positive. My first feeling wasn't joy. It was pure, cold shock. Then, terror. We weren't ready for this. But underneath the fear, a tiny, warm flicker of excitement started to grow. As the days passed, the fear began to recede, and the excitement bloomed. I started picturing it. Brendan, teaching our child to ride a bike in our driveway. A tiny hand wrapped tightly around my finger. I've always wanted to be a mom, and I truly believed with every fiber of my being, that Brendan would get there too, once he got over the initial shock. I decided to wait a whole week to tell him. I wanted the moment to be perfect, a memory we would cherish forever. I wasn't going to do one of those silly, over-the-top Instagram announcements. That wasn't us. Instead, I planned an evening steeped in our history. I would make his absolute favorite meal, my mother's recipe for a rich, cheesy lasagna, that garlic bread he loved, and a bottle of his favorite expensive bourbon waiting on the counter. A reward for his long week. I had a bottle of sparkling cider for myself. And I would wear that blue dress. I wanted everything to scream, "This is special." The whole time I was cooking that evening, with soft music playing in the kitchen, I kept rehearsing the words. My hands would still as I stirred the sauce, my mind racing. "Honey, we're going to be parents." No, too cheesy. Guess what? Too casual for news this big. I finally settled on something simple, something real. After dinner, I would take his hand and say, "I have some news. And it's going to change our lives forever." I smiled to myself, imagining the look of surprise and dawning joy on his face. Brendan came home around 7, later than usual. I heard his keys in the lock, and I smoothed down my dress, my heart fluttering with nervous excitement. But the man who walked in seemed like a stranger. He was distracted, his eyes glued to the bright screen of his phone, his thumb movingly. He'd been working on a big project at his firm, he'd said, and I tried to brush it off as work stress. He barely glanced at the carefully set table, just mumbled, "Smells good," and walked straight to the liquor cabinet. He poured himself a huge glass of bourbon before I could even say a word about the special occasion. My heart sank just a little. Dinner was quiet. Painfully, unnervingly quiet. I tried to draw him out, to fill the silence that felt like a growing chasm between us. I asked about his day, about the big project, anything. He just shrugged, offering one-word answers, his attention still mostly on the phone sitting face down beside his plate. Something felt deeply, terribly wrong, a cold dread coiling in my gut. But I pushed it down. I told myself he was just tired. I clung to the hope that my news would be the thing to break through this strange fog. After we finished eating, the plates cleared, I took a deep, shaky breath. It was now or never. I reached for his hand across the mahogany table. His skin felt cool, unresponsive. "Brendan," I started, my voice barely a whisper, the words I'd rehearsed all day suddenly feeling heavy and strange on my tongue. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was the loudest, most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of the room. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity, thick and heavy, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick with agonizing slowness, each tick a hammer blow against my fragile hope. I watched his face, desperately searching for a sign, any sign, of the man I loved, the man who held me when I was sick and celebrated my triumphs as his own. But the face staring back at me was a mask. A stranger's mask. His expression cycled through a series of horrifying emotions. First, just blankness, as if he hadn't understood the words. Then, his face went pale, a sickly, ashen color under the warm light of the dining room. And finally, his features twisted into something I had never, ever seen directed at me before, a terrifying mix of raw, animal panic and pure, undiluted anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was colder than the silence had been. "Are you joking?" My heart plummeted. "No," I said, shaking my head, a frantic, desperate movement. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out as a thin, reedy sound. "No, Brendan, I'm not. I've taken 4 tests. I went to the doctor yesterday to confirm. They were all positive. I thought the confirmation, the certainty, would make it real for him in a good way. I was so wrong." That's when the dam of his composure didn't just break, it exploded. The quiet, distracted man from dinner was gone, replaced by a raging stranger. "You ruined everything," he spat, yanking his hand away from mine as if my touch had physically burned him. The words weren't just spoken, they were projectiles, shot across the table to wound me. And they did. I flinched as if he'd slapped me. "I didn't want this. I didn't want this child," he roared, the last word echoing in the suddenly cavernous room. My mind scrambled, trying to find footing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. "It was an accident," I stammered, my voice trembling, the tears I'd been holding back now blurring his furious face. "It must have been the antibiotics I was on for that stomach bug. I thought we could figure it out. Together. Brendan, we always figure things out together." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that was completely devoid of humor. It was a sound of pure contempt, and it sent a chill of real fear down my spine. "Figure it out?" he sneered, pushing his chair back so violently it scraped against the hardwood floor. He stood up, beginning to pace the dining room like a caged tiger. "Abigail, there is nothing to figure out." He stopped and pointed a shaking finger at me. "Maybe I never wanted children at all. Did that ever cross your mind? Maybe this whole someday plan was just something I went along with to keep you happy. The room started to spin. Each word he spoke was like a poison dart, seeping into every happy memory we had ever shared and turning it rotten. The proposal by the lake, our wedding day, buying this house, was it all a lie? This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my Brandon. A cold, horrible thought, a seed of suspicion that had been planted by his distance over the past few weeks, suddenly sprouted in my mind. It was a question I was terrified to ask, because I knew, deep down, I was even more terrified of the answer. Is there someone else? The way he stopped pacing, the way his eyes darted away, unable to meet mine, it screamed the truth before his lips even moved. There was no denial. Not even a hesitation. When he finally looked at me, there was no guilt in his eyes. There was no sorrow. There was only the cold, hard resignation of a man who had already made his choice. And then, he turned and walked out of the dining room. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of our bedroom closet door sliding open. I followed him, my legs feeling like lead, my body moving on autopilot. He wasn't packing an overnight bag. He was pulling out his large, black suitcase, the one we used for vacations. He began pulling clothes from the closet, shirts, pants, sweaters, and throwing them into the bag with a brutal, uncaring efficiency that made me sick to my stomach. He wasn't leaving for the night. He was leaving for good. My husband was walking out on me. The very same night I told him I was carrying his child. It was a cruelty so profound, so cinematic, I couldn't process it as reality. Where are you going? I asked, my voice cracking on the last word. He didn't even pause in his packing. His voice was muffled by the clothes he was stuffing into the bag. I'm going to stay with her for now. Within 30 minutes of my life-altering pregnancy announcement, Brandon was standing by our front door, suitcase in hand. 30 minutes. That's all it took to dismantle and discard 7 years of my life. Are you seriously doing this? I begged, the tears now streaming down my face, my body shaking with a combination of shock and grief. You're just walking out? On your pregnant wife? He finally looked at me then, but his eyes were empty, hollowed out. I can't be a father, Abby. I'm not ready. Nobody is ever completely ready. I cried, my voice rising with desperation. That's not how life works. You don't just get to run away. He just mumbled, I'm sorry, a pathetic, meaningless phrase. He opened the door. The cool night air rushed in, feeling like a slap. I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. The silence he left behind was deafening, a physical presence that pressed in on me from all sides. I sank to the floor, my hand instinctively, protectively, covering my stomach. And in that moment, I finally understood the devastating truth. I wasn't just pregnant. I was utterly and completely alone. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold hardwood floor, just staring at the solid wood of the front door as if I could will him to walk back through it. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. Time had lost all meaning. The world had gone blurry and silent, the only sound the frantic, panic thumping of my own heart. My first coherent thought, the first signal that broke through the static of my shock, was Brenda. I needed my best friend. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock my phone. I found her name in my contacts and pressed the call button. The sound of my own voice when she answered was unrecognizable, a strangled, guttural sob. I couldn't form words, just fractured, desperate sounds of pain. Brenda, my friend since we were awkward middle schoolers, didn't even need an explanation. She just said, in that calm, commanding way of hers, I'm on my way. Don't move. And she hung up. 20 minutes later, she was there, using the spare key I'd given her years ago. She found me right where I'd fallen, a crumpled heap by the front door, the beautiful blue dress now wrinkled and stained with tears. She didn't bombard me with questions. She just knelt on the floor, wrapped her arms around my shaking shoulders, and held me as I cried. I cried until I had no tears left, until my whole body ached with the force of it, until all that was left were dry, shuddering gasps. I thought I knew him, Brenda, I kept saying over and over, the words catching in my throat like shards of glass. How could I have been so wrong? How could I have missed this? She just held me tighter, murmuring, "It's not your fault, Abby. It's not your fault." Eventually, she helped me up and guided me to the couch. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a glass of water and a warm, damp cloth for my face. She took off my shoes and covered me with a soft afghan my grandmother had knitted. She moved around the quiet house, turning off lights, checking the locks, creating a bubble of safety around my devastation. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a pounding headache and a stiff neck, Brenda sleeping in the armchair nearby. For a blissful, fleeting second, I thought it had all been a horrible, twisted nightmare. Then the wave of morning sickness hit, a violent, physical reminder that it was all real. Not only was my husband gone, but I was still very, very pregnant. Brenda made me toast, cutting it into small, manageable squares, and a cup of weak tea with honey. "You have to eat something," she said gently. "For the baby." My hand drifted to my stomach. My baby. This was still my child. Whatever monstrous choices Brandon had made, this tiny, innocent life was mine. A fierce, protective instinct flared up inside me, the first emotion other than grief I had felt in hours. I spent the day in a daze, trying to call him, but his phone went straight to voicemail every time. It was like I had ceased to exist. My texts, first begging him to come home and talk, then pleading with him not to shut me out, were met with a wall of digital silence. By the afternoon, the shock and grief began to curdle, replaced by the slow, hot burn of anger. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was an injustice. I pulled myself together, walked into my home office, and looked up my doctor's number. My voice was surprisingly steady when I called to schedule my first prenatal appointment. I was going to do this. With or without him. That evening, as I was listlessly picking at the leftover lasagna that now felt like a relic from another lifetime, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brandon. My heart leaped with a pathetic, desperate hope, which was immediately crushed. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a question about how I was. It was a cold, logistical statement. "I'm staying with Heather. I'll send money for the bills." Heather. So that was her name. The name of the woman he had chosen over me and our child. He'd mentioned her before, in passing. A brilliant young colleague on his team at the marketing firm, full of fresh ideas. 24 years old. 7 years younger than me. The thought made me feel ancient, used up. I replied instantly, my thumbs shaking with a mixture of rage and hurt. "We need to talk. In person. You owe me that much." His response came minutes later. "I need space. I'm not ready to talk yet." Space. He needed space. After blowing up my entire world. A week passed. Then 2. It was a period of suspended animation. I went to work, functioning on autopilot, smiling at colleagues, answering emails, while inside I was screaming. At night, I'd come home to the crushing silence of the house. He came by once, while I was at work, to get more of his things. He didn't call before. He didn't text after. He just took. He left his house keys on the polished granite of the kitchen counter, next to a single, folded piece of paper. Not even a letter. A note. "I've paid the mortgage through next month. I'll contact you about the divorce after I speak with a lawyer." Divorce. Lawyer. Just like that. After 7 years of life, of love, of shared history, he ended our marriage with a cold, impersonal note, like a memo left for a roommate. The cowardice of it was breathtaking. I crumpled the note in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm. The anger was a hot fire in my chest, burning away the last of my tears. He wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to erase me. Erase us. Erase our baby. And I would not let him. The next few days were a blur of pure, unadulterated rage and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I went to work, putting on my mask of professionalism, but inside I was crumbling. At night, I'd lie awake in our big, empty bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, trapped in a torturous loop. Who was this Heather? What did she have that I didn't? Was she funnier? Smarter? Prettier? The questions consumed me, eating away at my already shattered self-worth. One evening, after another sleepless night, fueled by a toxic cocktail of heartbreak, anger, and a desperate need for answers, I did something I knew I shouldn't. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my tear-streaked face in the dark living room. My fingers trembled as I typed her name, Heather Riley, into the search bar on social media. I told myself I just needed to see her face. I needed to understand who this person was, this person who held such power that she could obliterate my entire life. Her profile was public. And there she was. The pictures were bright, carefree. She was beautiful, in that effortless way of the very young, with long blonde hair and a bright, confident smile. Their profiles were a gallery of my stolen life. Pictures of them laughing at a rooftop bar, his arms slung possessively around her. A weekend trip to the coast, the same spot he and I had gone for our anniversary last year. He looked happy. Younger. Unburdened. There were no signs of sleepless nights or a wife at home waiting for him. I scrolled through her photos, each one a fresh stab to my heart. My finger hovered over the mouse, ready to close the window, to spare myself this self-inflicted torture. But then I saw it. A picture from a few months back. It was a group photo, tagged Awesome Family Barbecue. And in the photo, standing next to Heather, her arm slung casually around Heather's shoulder, was my father's new wife, Diane. And next to them, holding a beer and smiling broadly at the camera, was my own father. The world didn't just stop. It ceased to exist. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It felt like a glitch in reality. It didn't make sense. My dad had remarried 5 years ago, after my mom passed away from a long illness. His new wife, Diane, was a perfectly nice woman who tried a little too hard. She had a daughter from her first marriage. A daughter who was in college out of state, who I had only met a handful of times at awkward holiday gatherings. A quiet, pretty girl who had always been polite. A daughter named Heather. My stepsister. The breath left my body in a ragged, painful gasp. I felt a wave of nausea so intense, so violent, I had to grip the sides of my desk to keep from falling out of my chair. It wasn't just some random, younger colleague. It was my own stepsister. The girl who had sat at our Christmas dinner table last year, smiling sweetly and calling me her new big sis. The girl I had given friendly, sisterly advice to about her career. The betrayal was so deep, so monstrously intimate, it felt like it was physically tearing me apart. Every polite conversation, every shared holiday dinner, every fake, smiling photo was now tainted with this sickening, horrifying truth. They hadn't just had an affair. They had orchestrated it right under my nose, weaving a web of lies within the fractured structure of my own family. My own father had welcomed my husband's mistress, my own sister, into his home, had smiled for pictures with them. I thought back to a phone call with my dad a few months prior. He'd mentioned, so casually, that Diane's daughter, Heather, had gotten a great new job in the city, at a big marketing firm. The same firm where Brendan worked. I remembered Brendan mentioning, with a strange enthusiasm, that he was mentoring a new hire, a real go-getter. It all clicked into place, a series of horrifying, perfectly aligned puzzle pieces. This wasn't a random affair. This was a calculated, deliberate, evil deception. I stumbled to the bathroom and was violently sick, retching until there was nothing left. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, my body shaking uncontrollably, I realized the devastating truth. The pain I had felt when Brendan walked out the door was nothing, a mere paper cut compared to this. That was a clean wound. This was a rot. A poison that had infected every part of my life, every relationship I held dear. They hadn't just broken my heart. They had conspired to destroy my entire world. After the soul-crushing revelation about Heather, I felt like I was living underwater. The world seemed muted, distant, every sound muffled. I called in sick to work for 2 days, unable to conjure the energy to get out of bed, let alone face my colleagues with a smile. I didn't even tell Brenda the full story at first. The shame and the horror of the incestuous betrayal were too great, too ugly to put into words. It felt like a secret so dark it would contaminate anyone I told. Just when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, that I had hit the absolute bedrock of despair, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but in my numb state, I answered it anyway. Abigail? The voice was crisp, cold, and instantly recognizable. It was Eleanor, Brendan's mother. My mother-in-law. Hello, Eleanor, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth it once held when I spoke to her. Brendan told us the situation, she said, and the slight, deliberate pause before the word situation was dripping with a chilling disapproval. I just wanted to call and say that you need to give him some time. He's feeling very pressured right now, you understand. I almost let out a wild, hysterical laugh. Pressured? He was feeling pressured? He's the one who walked out, Eleanor. On his pregnant wife. For my own stepsister. I added that last part with a bitter, venomous satisfaction, wanting to see if it would even register. She completely ignored it, as if I hadn't spoken. Well, he's still so young, she continued, her tone patronizing. He has his whole career ahead of him, a big promotion on the line. A family, it's a lot to handle at his age. It can be a distraction. He's 31 years old, Eleanor, I said, my voice rising, the anger starting to cut through my numbness. He's a grown man who made a choice. A series of choices. Then came the real kicker, the line that proved her heart was as cold and empty as her son's. I'm just saying, she continued, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were sharing a helpful piece of advice between women, that you should consider all your options. It's still early. There are ways to handle these things discreetly, so they don't have to disrupt a young man's promising future. The implication was so clear, so monstrously selfish, it stole the air from my lungs. She was suggesting I get an abortion. To erase the problem, to sweep my child under the rug, so her precious, golden boy son could continue his life unburdened and uninterrupted. Something inside me, something that had been beaten down and broken, suddenly snapped. The fog of grief was burned away by a white-hot, cleansing rage. Let me be perfectly clear, Eleanor, I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I didn't know I possessed. I am keeping this baby. My baby. Your grandchild. And if Brendan is too much of a coward to be a father, that is his failure and his shame, not mine. Do not ever call me again with such a disgusting, evil suggestion. I slammed the phone down so hard it rattled in its cradle. My entire body was trembling, not with fear or sadness, but with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. So that's where Brendan got his soulless selfishness from. It was inherited. It was taught. A few days later, his father, Richard, called. He took a softer, more manipulative approach, asking how I was doing, feigning a fatherly concern that now made my skin crawl. But it was all a lead-up to the same rotten conclusion. We're just worried about Brendan, sweetheart, he said in a soothing, condescending voice. This is a really crucial time for his career. This pregnancy, as wonderful as a baby is unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. My child, his own flesh and blood, was unfortunate timing. He also told us about the deep connection he has with Heather, Richard continued, as if that noble, romantic fact excused everything. Sometimes these things just happen. The heart wants what it wants. He offered financial help. He talked about setting up a meeting with their lawyer to discuss a fair settlement for the divorce, to make sure I was taken care of. He was trying to buy my silence, to pay me off like a disgruntled former employee. Not once did he say that what his son did was wrong. Not once did he offer a shred of genuine human empathy. After I hung up the phone, I sat in the suffocating silence of my too-empty house and finally understood. I was utterly, completely, and profoundly alone in this. Brandon had chosen Heather. His parents had chosen him. And my own father, well, his deafening silence on the matter was its own kind of betrayal. It was just me and my baby now. Against all of them. And strangely, in that moment of absolute desolation, I felt a flicker of something else take root in my heart. Defiance. They thought they could break me, erase me, sweep me and my child aside. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first thing I did was look up family law attorneys. The fight was just beginning. The months that followed were the longest and loneliest of my life. Pregnancy is supposed to be a time of joy, of shared excitement and preparation. For me, it was a period of quiet, determined solitude, a long and arduous battle fought on my own. The first step was leaving the house. I couldn't stay there. Every corner held a memory that now felt like a lie. The spot on the couch where we used to watch movies, the kitchen where I had cooked that final, fateful meal. It was all tainted. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cynthia who looked at me not with pity, but with a determined fire in her eyes that mirrored my own. We started the divorce proceedings immediately. Brandon didn't contest anything. He just wanted out, clean and fast. His lawyer and mine handled everything. Our shared assets were divided, papers were signed. It was all so clinical, so detached, like closing out a business account, not ending a 7-year marriage. The process of packing up our life together was its own special kind of hell. I did it mostly alone, on weekends. Brenda would come over to help, her presence a silent, steady source of strength. Every box was a fresh wave of grief. I found old concert tickets, photos from our honeymoon, the silly little notes he used to leave for me on the bathroom mirror. I had to decide what to keep, what to throw away, what to burn. It felt like I was curating a museum of a dead life. Brenda helped me find a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex across town. It was more expensive than I could comfortably afford on my single salary, but it was safe, and it was a clean slate. The second bedroom, once destined to be my home office, slowly transformed into a nursery. The transformation was a slow, deliberate act of hope. I spent a whole weekend painting the walls a soft, sunny yellow, my pregnant belly bumping against the latter. I did it all by myself, feeling a fierce sense of pride with every brushstroke. I spent hours online at night, when the loneliness was at its worst, researching cribs and car seats, my credit card bills piling up at an alarming rate. Every purchase was a fresh reminder that I was doing this alone. There was no partner to debate color schemes with, no strong hands to help me decipher the cryptic, hieroglyphic instructions for assembling a changing table. I remember one Saturday afternoon, sitting on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by pieces of the unassembled crib, the instruction manual looking like a foreign language. I was hormonal, exhausted, and I just started to cry. Deep, shuddering sobs of frustration and loneliness. I felt so pathetic. But then, I looked at the ultrasound picture I had taped to the wall. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and I picked up the screwdriver. I finished building that crib, piece by piece, even if it took me until midnight. There were moments of profound loneliness that would hit me out of nowhere, like ambushes. Standing in the baby aisle at Target, surrounded by glowing, happy couples laughing and picking out tiny socks. Lying in bed at night, feeling the baby kick, a flutter of life inside me, with no one to place a hand on my belly and share the miracle with. My first prenatal appointment was the hardest. I sat in the waiting room, my eyes fixed on a magazine, trying to ignore the happy chatter of the other expectant mothers, all holding hands with their proud husbands. When the nurse called my name, Abigail Foster, I walked back to the exam room alone. And then, the technician squeezed the cold gel onto my stomach, the screen flickered to life, and I heard it. A sound like a tiny, frantic drumbeat. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The sound of my baby's heartbeat. Strong. Real. Alive. Tears streamed down my face. The kind technician patted my arm, probably thinking they were just tears of joy. And they were, in a way. But they were also tears of profound grief. Grief for the family I thought we'd be. Grief for the father this tiny, perfect person would now never know. They gave me a small, grainy printout of the ultrasound image. It was just a little bean-shaped blur, but in that moment, it was my entire universe. It was my reason. I went home to my empty apartment and stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet. It became my anchor, my North Star. Every morning, when the nausea hit, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight, when I worried about the mounting bills, I would look at that little black and white photo. It was a promise. A reminder that no matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, I wasn't truly alone. This little person was counting on me. And I would be damned if I was going to let them down. Leo was born on a Tuesday night in late October, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, after 19 hours of grueling, exhausting labor. Brenda was by my side the entire time, my birthing partner, my coach, my unwavering rock. She held my hand, fed me ice chips, and let me squeeze her fingers until they were numb while I swore, through gritted teeth, that I couldn't do it anymore. She was the one who wiped the sweat from my brow and told me I was the strongest person she knew. The nurses were kind, but their professional cheerfulness sometimes grated on my raw nerves. They kept asking about Dad. Is Dad on his way? Should we call Dad? After the third time, I got tired of the pitying looks I received when I explained the situation. It was easier to just say, he's not in the picture. The phrase felt both perfectly true and like the most massive understatement of all time. The moment they placed Leo on my chest, a tiny, screaming, wonderfully wrinkled creature, the rest of the world, the beeping machines, the tired nurses, the entire painful history of the past 9 months, it all just melted away into a blurry background. There was only him. His dark, curious eyes, still swollen from birth, staring up at me as if he already knew me. His perfect, tiny fingers, with their even tinier fingernails, wrapping around one of mine with surprising strength. He was real. He was here. And he was mine. All mine. Those first few weeks were a disorienting blur of sleeplessness, around-the-clock feedings, and a constant, low-grade panic that I was doing everything wrong. The night we came home from the hospital was the absolute worst. Leo wouldn't stop crying. It wasn't a normal baby cry, it was a high-pitched, inconsolable wail that went on for hours. I tried everything in the parenting books, feeding, burping, changing his diaper, swaddling him tighter, then looser, rocking him, walking with him. Nothing worked. At 3 a.m, I remember sitting on the cold tile floor of my bathroom, the one place where the acoustics seemed to slightly muffle the screams. I was crying too, my own silent, exhausted tears streaming down my face, with Leo wailing in my arms. I was Googling why won't my baby stop crying on my phone with one hand, my vision blurry. In that moment, I had never felt so overwhelmed, so ill-equipped, so completely and utterly alone. But we survived that night. And the next one. And the one after that. Day by day, hour by hour, we figured it out, Leo and I. We became a team. I learned to decipher his cries. I learned that the short, sharp hungry cry was different from the long, whining tired cry, which was completely different from the fussy, heartbroken I just want to be held cry. I discovered he loved it when I sang old lullabies to him, even though I can't carry a tune to save my life. I watched his personality emerge, bit by bit. He was a serious, observant baby, but he had a sudden, explosive laugh that could light up the entire room and make all the hard moments worth it. Work was a whole other challenge. I had to go back when Leo was just 10 weeks old. My savings were gone, and the bills weren't going to pay themselves. My boss, Anastasia, was surprisingly understanding, letting me work from home 2 days a week, a lifesaver. But finding affordable childcare nearly broke me, financially and emotionally. The cost of daycare was more than my monthly rent, a staggering fact of modern life that still seems absolutely insane to me. The child support from Brenda, which had been ordered in the divorce, was sporadic at best. A check would arrive 1 month, then nothing for the next 2. There was always a creative excuse texted through his lawyer. His car needed expensive repairs. He had unexpected medical expenses. He was switching jobs and the paperwork was delayed. 1 month, the payment was 2 weeks late. A few days later, I made the mistake of unblocking Heather on social media during a moment of weak curiosity. The first picture I saw was of her and Brenda in Spain, smiling, tanned, and carefree. My son's child support was funding their romantic European vacation. I felt sick. I blocked them both again after that, for good this time. Brenda was right, it was poison to my mental health. I had sent Brandon a simple text the day Leo was born, with his birth date, weight, and a single, clear photo. I received no response. I created a private, shared photo album online, occasionally uploading new pictures, just in case he ever developed a conscience and wanted to see his son. As far as I could tell, he never even opened the link. My son's father lived less than 30 minutes away, in a world of rooftop bars and European holidays, and he was a complete and total stranger. Just when I thought I had finally found a fragile piece, a predictable, if exhausting, routine for me and Leo, they came knocking. Or rather, texting. It started with a message from an unknown number, which turned out to be Eleanor, Brendan's mother. It arrived about a month after Leo was born. "We hear you had the baby. We would like to see our grandson." I stared at the message for a full 10 minutes, a bitter, incredulous laugh bubbling up in my throat. Our grandson. The same grandson she had so coldly suggested I get rid of to protect her son's career prospects. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. A few days later, a massive bouquet of flowers arrived at my apartment, the card signed from Eleanor and Richard. Then, a box from a ridiculously expensive baby boutique, filled with designer clothes that would fit a 1-year-old. And finally, a handwritten letter, full of flowery language about the importance of family and how they'd love to be a part of their grandson's life. Brenda's advice was simple: ignore them. Throw the letter in the trash. But a small, naive, and foolish part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, the reality of Leo's birth had changed them. Maybe seeing him, holding him, would make them realize the gravity of what their son had done. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to a short, 1-hour visit at my apartment when Leo was 4 months old. It was one of the most awkward, tense hours of my entire life. Eleanor and Richard arrived bearing armfuls of ostentatious gifts, as if they could buy their way back into our lives with a mountain of plastic toys and cashmere baby blankets. The air was thick with unspoken words. Eleanor kept commenting, with a forced brightness, on how much Leo looked like Brandon as a baby. Richard, meanwhile, took about 50 photos on his phone, posing Leo this way and that, like he was a prop. Not once did they apologize. Not once did they mention their son's complete and total absence. Not once did they acknowledge their own horrific behavior on the phone. They acted as if the past few months had simply never happened, as if we were all just one big happy family enjoying a pleasant afternoon visit. The visit was winding down, and I was counting the seconds until I could ask them to leave. That's when Eleanor dropped the bomb. "He's such a good baby," she cooed, stroking Leo's soft cheek as he slept in my arms. "We'd love to take him for an overnight stay next weekend. It would give you a little break. You must be so tired." I froze. The suggestion was so out of touch, so presumptuous, it took my breath away. Let my infant son, the child they had basically suggested I terminate, go anywhere with them? Be out of my sight, in their care? Absolutely, unequivocally not. I drew a hard, clear line. No, I said, my voice polite but laced with steel. That's not going to happen. Eleanor's pleasant smile tightened at the edges. Don't be difficult, Abigail. We're his grandparents. We have rights, you know. We could get a lawyer involved for visitation. The threat, veiled as it was the final straw. You have the rights that I grant you, I replied, my politeness evaporating completely. And after you suggested I get an abortion, you're incredibly lucky that I'm even letting you in my home at all. The atmosphere in the small apartment turned instantly hostile. Richard started to stammer, trying to smooth things over, but Eleanor was furious, her face flushing an ugly, blotchy red. And that's when she said it, the line that revealed their true, selfish, rotten core. You're just using that baby to punish Brandon, aren't you? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You're keeping him from his family out of pure spite. The audacity, the sheer, mind-bending hypocrisy of her accusation, was breathtaking. Brandon had shown zero interest in his own son. He was the one keeping himself from his child. And I was the one being accused of spite? I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it wide. The visit is over, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Please leave. Now. They left, sputtering with indignation about my ingratitude. As I closed and locked the door behind them, I made a solemn vow to my sleeping son. I would never again expose him to that kind of toxic, manipulative hypocrisy. He deserved better. He deserved people in his life who chose him, who loved him unconditionally. And if that meant it was just the two of us against the world, then so be it. If you're still listening to my story, if you've followed me this far into the darkness, I just want to say thank you. It means more than you know. Please, if you could, help me out by liking this video and leaving a comment with the number 1 down below. That way, I know you gave me a like, and I'll know that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me to keep going. Just comment the number 1, and then listen to what happened next. 5 years. It's a strange measurement of time. It can feel like a lifetime and the blink of an eye all at once. The sleepless nights with a newborn, which I thought would never end, were replaced by kindergarten orientation and scraped knees. The tiny, helpless baby who depended on me for everything was now a chatty, energetic, and impossibly smart 5-year-old named Leo who knew all the planets in order and would solemnly correct my pronunciation of dinosaur names. Time is a wild, relentless, and healing thing. We had built a good life, he and I. It wasn't easy. There were years of juggling daycare drop-offs and looming work deadlines, of existing in a state of perpetual exhaustion. There were times of scraping by to make ends meet, of carefully calculating every grocery bill. The child support from Brandon had eventually stopped altogether around Leo's 3rd birthday. After a series of missed payments and flimsy excuses, I filed with the state enforcement agency. But he had become a ghost, changing jobs so many times that they could never keep up. Eventually, I made a conscious decision to let it go. The stress of the fight, the constant anger and anxiety, wasn't worth it. I'd rather Leo see me calm and present than constantly anxious over money we could, with careful budgeting, manage without. My career, thankfully, had not just stabilized, it had flourished. Anastasia, my boss, had seen my hard work and my unwavering dedication. She'd given me more responsibility, bigger projects. Last year, she had called me into her office and offered me a promotion to senior project manager. The significant raise in my salary was life-changing. It meant I could finally stop the instability of renting. I saved every penny, and 6 months ago, I bought a small, 2-bedroom townhouse in a good school district. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. It had a little backyard where we attempted to grow tomatoes that never quite turned out right, and Leo's colorful handprints were framed and painted on his bedroom wall. It was our sanctuary, built not on a broken marriage, but on my own 2 hands. The question I had been dreading for years finally came one day in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. "Mommy," Leo asked, his small voice piping up completely out of the blue, "why don't I have a daddy?" I had prepared for this moment. I had read articles, I had rehearsed age-appropriate explanations. But nothing truly prepares you for looking into those innocent, curious eyes. I knelt down right there in the aisle, took a deep breath, and told him a simplified version of the truth. That his daddy wasn't ready to be a parent, but that it didn't mean anything was wrong with Leo. That sometimes, grown-ups make big, sad choices that hurt people, but that I had wanted him and loved him enough for 2 parents, and then some. It was a conversation we would have many more times, and it never got any easier. Then, about 10 months ago, something completely unexpected happened. At a chaotic parent-teacher night at Leo's preschool, I met Walter. He was the father of a sweet little girl named Emma, one of Leo's best friends. He was a widower, and he had this kind, gentle, and calming energy about him. He also wore a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right," which made me laugh. It started innocently, with playdates for the kids at the park. Then coffee while they played. Then dinner one night after soccer practice ran late. Walter was patient. He understood, without me having to explain it, that Leo and I were a package deal, always. He never rushed anything. He asked thoughtful questions about Leo's current obsession with astronauts and brought him books about stars. The first time he fixed Leo's wobbly bicycle seat without being asked, I nearly cried at the simple, profound kindness of it. We had been officially dating for 7 months now, taking it slow, building something real. For the first time in 5 long years, I was allowing myself to picture a future with someone again. Then, just yesterday, I ran into an old friend of Brandon's while picking Leo up from school. After some awkward small talk, he dropped a bomb. Brandon and Heather had broken up 6 months ago. Apparently, after all those years, she wanted to get married and start a family. And Brandon, now 35 years old, was still saying he wasn't ready for kids. After he'd strung her along for years, she finally gave him an ultimatum, and he chose, well, not her. The irony was so thick, so bitter, I could taste it. The friend also told me that Brandon's company had downsized last year, and he'd been laid off. He'd been struggling to find stable work ever since. He was crashing on friends' couches. The perfect, glamorous life he had abandoned us for had completely, spectacularly fallen apart. I sat in my car after that conversation, not sure how to feel. There was no triumphant, serves him right moment like the younger, angrier version of me might have imagined. There was just a strange, quiet emptiness. That chapter of my life felt like it was from a different book entirely, one I had finished reading and placed on a dusty shelf long ago. To truly understand where I am now, to understand the peace I've found, you have to understand Walter. He is the quiet, steady, and unwavering presence that came into my life when I wasn't even looking for one. After what happened with Brandon and Heather, I had built walls around my heart so high and thick, I didn't think anyone could ever scale them. I wasn't interested in dating. I was cynical and wary. My life was about my career and my son, and I had convinced myself that was more than enough. Walter didn't try to scale the walls. He didn't try to knock them down. He just sat outside them, patiently, being a friend. As a single dad who had been through his own profound loss, he just got it. He understood the bone-deep exhaustion, the constant juggling act, the way your entire world shrinks to the size of your child's needs and joys. His wife, Emma's mom, had passed away from cancer when Emma was just a year old. He spoke about her with such a beautiful combination of love and sadness, and he was so rawly honest about his fears of raising a daughter alone. His vulnerability, his lack of pretense, made me trust him in a way I hadn't trusted anyone in a very long time. Our first real date, without the kids in tow, was almost comically simple. We went for a walk in the local park on a sunny afternoon. He didn't try to impress me with a fancy restaurant or grand gestures. He just listened. He asked me about my work, not just what I did, but what I was passionate about. He asked me about my dreams before everything had changed. He saw me, Abigail, the person, not just Leo's mom, the single mother with a tragic backstory. And he was absolutely incredible with Leo. He never, ever tried to be a replacement father. He never overstepped. He was just Walter. A kind, funny grown-up who would get down on the floor to build elaborate Lego castles for hours and who knew an impressive amount about the different types of construction vehicles. He was the one who taught Leo how to properly skip a stone across the pond, a skill I had never mastered. I remember watching them from a distance one afternoon, my son's face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy as a flat rock skittered across the water's surface. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the sun. One evening, months after we started dating, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, we were sitting on my small back porch, nursing cups of tea. He turned to me, his expression serious but gentle, and told me he was falling in love with me. He said he saw a future with me, with us. All of us. He said he was ready whenever I was, and that he would wait as long as it took for me to feel safe. There was no drama, no pressure. Just quiet, steady honesty. And in that moment, looking into his kind eyes, I knew. I was falling in love with him, too. For the first time since Brandon had walked out that door, I felt completely and utterly safe. I felt seen. I felt hopeful. Walter was everything Brandon wasn't. He was present. He was reliable. He was honest. He was kind to his very core. He was a true partner. He was a man who didn't run from responsibility, but embraced it with a quiet strength. He was the unexpected light I never knew I was searching for. He and his daughter, Emma, were seamlessly, beautifully becoming our family. And our little townhouse, once a quiet sanctuary for two, was starting to feel like a real, bustling, happy home for four. Last Saturday started like any other weekend morning. There were pancakes for breakfast, a frantic, 10-minute search for a missing pair of soccer socks, and then a rush to get Leo to his 9 a.m. game. It was a chilly, overcast morning, the kind where you can see your breath, and Walter and I were huddled under a large umbrella on the sidelines, sipping coffee from thermoses and cheering on the little swarm of 5-year-olds as they chaotically chased a ball up and down the field. Halfway through the first half, Walter nudged my arm. "Hey, is that someone you know?" he asked, his voice low, nodding his head toward the far side of the field, near the parking lot. I followed his gaze, squinting. And my blood ran cold. My thermos suddenly felt heavy in my hand. Leaning against a large oak tree, his arms crossed, just watching, was Brandon. After 5 years of complete and utter absence, 5 years of silence, my ex-husband was just there. No warning. No heads-up text from him or his parents. Nothing. He looked different. Thinner, and somehow smaller than I remembered. The confident, arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary hesitation. My first, primal instinct was to grab Leo and run. To shield him from this ghost from a past he didn't even remember. But I was frozen to the spot, my feet rooted to the damp grass. When halftime was called, Leo ran over to us, his face flushed and bright with excitement, chattering a mile a minute about a good defensive play he'd made. And that's when I saw Brandon start walking toward us, a slow, deliberate pace across the field. Leo spotted him, too. He stopped talking mid-sentence and tugged on my sleeve, his voice suddenly small. "Mommy, who's that strange man?" Before I could formulate an answer, he was standing there, just a few feet away. The air crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension. The cheerful sounds of the other kids and parents seemed to fade into a dull roar. "Abby," he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. He looked down at Leo, a strange, pained, and unreadable expression on his face. "Wow. He's gotten so big." I instinctively put a protective hand on Leo's shoulder, pulling him slightly behind me. "What are you doing here, Brandon?" I asked, my voice low and shaking with a cold fury I hadn't felt in years. Walter, ever my rock, stepped forward slightly, a solid, calming presence by my side. He didn't say anything aggressive, but his posture was protective. He was a shield. My mother mentioned the soccer schedule, Brandon admitted, finally answering my question, his eyes shifting away from mine. Of course. Eleanor. The sudden increase in friendly, inquisitive texts from his parents over the past few months now made a sick kind of sense. They weren't trying to reconnect. They were his spies. You have no right to be here, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. You don't get to just show up after 5 years and expect a welcome. I know, he said, looking down at his worn-out sneakers. I know. Can we please just talk? After the game? Please, Abby. 20 minutes. I looked down at Leo, who was staring up at this stranger with wide, confused eyes. I didn't want to make a scene here, not in front of my son, not in front of his friends and their parents. Reluctantly, my stomach in knots, I agreed. Walter immediately understood, his gaze full of support. I'll take the kids for Victory ice cream, he said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze under the cover of the umbrella. Take your time. Call me if you need anything at all. As I watched Walter lead Leo and Emma away, Leo now chattering happily again, his attention completely diverted by the promise of ice cream, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated on the sidelines, I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. And then I turned, took a deep, fortifying breath, and walked toward the coffee shop across the street to confront the man who had nearly destroyed my life. The coffee shop was mostly empty, smelling of roasted beans and cleaning supplies. Brandon was already sitting at a small table in the corner. He'd ordered a coffee for me, a cappuccino. I hadn't ordered a cappuccino in at least 4 years, I'd switched to black lattes. It was such a small, insignificant detail, but somehow it highlighted the vast chasm of time and change that separated the woman he had known from the woman I was now. He looked older than his 35 years. There were deep lines of stress etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his clothes, while clean, looked worn. He started talking, his story coming out in a torrent of broken, disjointed pieces, a rehearsed-sounding monologue of self-pity. He told me about the breakup with Heather. About how her wanting a family, the very thing he'd run from with me, had triggered all his old fears and inadequacies. He told me about losing his high-paying job in a round of corporate downsizing, about how his pride had kept him from finding something lesser. He'd burned through his savings. His life, he said, had completely spiraled. He told me he'd been going to therapy for the last year. That he'd been sober for 8 months. Then came the part that made my stomach turn with its transparent attempt at manipulation. He claimed that the reason he'd stayed away all these years, the reason he'd ignored my texts and the photos of our son, was because he'd asked his parents to limit contact. He said he couldn't handle the guilt, the constant reminder of what he had so carelessly abandoned. He was trying to frame his profound cowardice and neglect as some kind of noble, tortured self-flagellation. And now? I asked, my voice flat, refusing to give him the sympathy he was so clearly fishing for. What's changed now, Brandon? I have, he said, leaning forward, his eyes suddenly intense, pleading. I've done the work. I've faced my demons. I know what I lost. I know I made the biggest mistake of my life. I want to make things right, Abby. I want to know my son. I took a slow sip of the cappuccino. It was too sweet. Leo is not a baby you can just pick up and play with to assuage your guilt, I said, my voice cold and even. He is a person. A happy, well-adjusted person with feelings, with a life that you know absolutely nothing about. A life that has a loving, stable, and consistent father figure in it named Walter. A flicker of something ugly, pain, jealousy, resentment, crossed his face when I said that. He quickly acknowledged that he couldn't just walk in and be dad. He asked, his voice cracking slightly, if I would even consider letting him see Leo. A supervised meeting, at a park. Just to start. Against my better judgment, a small part of me, the mother part that felt Leo had a right to know his biological history, agreed to think about it. But then, just as I was gathering my purse to leave, he overplayed his hand so badly it was almost comical. That evening, he showed up at my townhouse. Unannounced. And he wasn't alone. He had Eleanor and Richard with him, like pathetic reinforcements. They pushed past me into my living room, talking loudly about moving forward as a family, about making up for lost time, as if they could just bulldoze their way back into our lives. I sent them home, my voice shaking with rage at their unbelievable nerve. But Brandon lingered behind after they had gone. "Please, Abby, just talk to me," he said, blocking the doorway. And that's when he dropped it. The most audacious, delusional, and insulting statement I had ever heard in my life. He took a step closer, his eyes filled with a desperate, manufactured emotion that he probably thought looked like love. "I still love you, Abby," he whispered, as if he were in a movie. I never stopped. I just stared at him, speechless. "I know you're with Walter," he continued, rushing on, the words tumbling out. "But he's not Leo's real father. I am. We are his real parents. Our son deserves a chance to have his real family together. We should try again. We can fix this." He suggested that we, the two of us, reunite. For Leo's sake. The sheer, unmitigated audacity was breathtaking. The man who had abandoned me when I was at my most vulnerable for my own stepsister, who had left me to go through pregnancy and childbirth and the hardest years of my life completely and utterly alone, now stood on the doorstep of the home I had built without him, asking for a second chance. He wasn't a changed man seeking forgiveness. He was a drowning man looking for a life raft. And he had the nerve to think I was it. I asked him to leave. My voice was eerily calm. I told him I needed to think, but it was a lie. There was nothing to think about. When he was finally, reluctantly gone, I locked the door, bolted it, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, letting out a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. When Walter came downstairs a little while later, having masterfully handled the bedtime routines for both kids, he took one look at my pale face and knew instantly. "What did he do?" he asked, his voice gentle, his presence immediately grounding. I told him everything. About the ambush with his parents. About the pathetic declaration of love. About the insane, insulting suggestion that we should get back together and play house for Leo's sake. I watched Walter's face carefully, saw the flicker of concern in his eyes, not a doubt in me, but the understandable worry that a biological father could somehow hold a primal power that he couldn't. I walked over to him, stood on my tiptoes, and cupped his face in my hands. "Walter," I said, looking him straight in the eye, pouring every ounce of sincerity I had into my words. "I am exactly where I want to be. You and Emma and Leo. This is my life. This is my family. Brandon is a ghost. He is a stranger who happens to share some DNA with my son. That is all he is, and all he will ever be." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost made me cry. He pulled me into a hug, and I melted into him, feeling safe and cherished. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. I meant what I said. I want another chance with our family. I stared at the words, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just a kind of weary pity. He hadn't changed. He had just failed. His life with Heather, the life he had so callously chosen over me and our child, had imploded. And now that he was at rock bottom, he was crawling back, expecting me to be his salvation, to fix him, to put his broken, self-inflicted life back together. The Abigail he had left 7 years ago might have considered it. That girl was broken, lost, and desperate for the family she thought she'd lost. But I was not that woman anymore. I had fought through hell and built a life, a real life, a happy life, from the ashes. The next morning, I called him. My voice was calm and steady, the voice of a woman in complete control of her world. "Brandon," I said, cutting him off before he could start his pleading. "Let me be perfectly clear, so there is no confusion. There is no us. There is no second chance. That bridge was not just burned, it was nuked from orbit the night you walked out that door with your suitcase. I laid out the terms. If you truly want to be in Leo's life, it will be on my terms, and my terms alone. It will start with you finding a family therapist, and if they deem it appropriate, you will have sessions with Leo. After that, and only after that, we can discuss short, supervised visits in a public place. You will have to earn even the smallest sliver of your son's time and trust. You will not be Dad. You will be Brandon. A biological father who has a universe of making up to do. Am I understood? I continued before he could answer. And you are to never, ever show up at my home unannounced again. This is my sanctuary. This is my family's home. And you are not welcome here. He was silent for a long, long moment on the other end of the line. And in his silence, I knew he finally understood. The door was closed. And it was bolted, locked, and barricaded. It was never going to open for him again. Some bridges, once burned, stay ash forever. And my life, my beautiful, hard-won, wonderfully happy life, was built on the other side of that ruin, shining brightly in the sun. As I hung up the phone, I looked out my kitchen window and saw Walter in the backyard, pushing a laughing Leo on the swing set we had built together. And I smiled. I was finally, truly home. Thank you so much for listening to my entire story. It wasn't easy to tell, but sharing it, knowing someone out there understands, helps more than you can imagine. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight your way back from betrayal and build a new life for yourself, please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories give me strength. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Your support means the world to me. We'll talk again soon.